Hello and welcome to Trash to Track. In this episode I'm going to be looking at this rather battered Bachmann Deltic that I've had in my collection for a little while, that I managed to pick up relatively cheap after it was traded in at the local model shop. Now this Deltic, somebody's tried to renumber and name this in the past, and for some reason the roof and bonnet tops have got a coat of matte black paint. Now whether that's supposed to be weathering I'm not sure, but it doesn't look very nice at all. Now in the box there are various parts that have come off or I've acquired for this rebuild, including some couplings which appear to be missing and some buffers, because two of the buffers are missing on each end. There's also the nameplates that have fallen off, various pipes, and one of the head code panels is in there as well. The other is loose and I believe it to be inside the body shell, as the body shell rattles when you pick it up. So I'm going to give it a quick battery test to see if there's any life in this model whatsoever. And there is. Typical robust, rugged Bachmann diesel. Although after it jolted backwards there, it wasn't very keen on doing much else. I think that's just down to a bit of a build-up of dirt on the wheel treads and pickups, but we'll sort that out later on. Now, to remove the body shell from a Bachmann Deltic, there are 6 screws, 2 under each nose and 1 next to each fuel tank. And as you can see there, like I said, the head code is missing. I think it's been pushed in. There's a gap where it should be. So I'm hoping that when we remove this body shell, it's in there. And the transfers and renumbering job have left marks on the body side, and the transfers are just laid on the factory finish. The carrier film's visible, and they've actually yellowed quite badly. The nameplates are stuck on with super glue, and this one on this side is actually kinked. So now I'm going to remove these screws. As I said, there's 6. There's 2 under each nose and 1 next to each fuel tank. And once these have been removed, the body shell should lift off okay. But on this particular model, when I tried to remove the body shell, it wouldn't come off one end. So I initially thought that the screws were still in there. And there's that head code from one end that it was indeed inside the body shell, which was a bit of luck. But I initially thought I hadn't undone the screws correctly. But that's not what it is. It turns out that the previous owners actually glued, whether intentionally or not, glued the body shell to the chassis, and it actually broke the buffer beam. So I will replace that later on with a new buffer beam made out of black plasticard. But you've got the typical mid-2000s Bachmann motor there, very simple, DCC ready, and there's the remnants of the old buffer beam, able to pick it out of the body shell, and the windows inside of this have all been painted black as well for some reason. So I'm going to start by servicing the chassis. Now I'm going to release both bogies. Now to do that you have to undo this screw that retains the bogie in the die-cast frame. And then the bogie can disengage from the drive shaft, but you also have to remove these plastic retaining pieces that hold the pickup wires to the PCB. Now I found it easier just to loosen the screw holding the PCB, and then the wires will come out. They're not soldered in, they are just a push fit with these plastic retaining pieces. And then once they're put back on for safekeeping, the bogie will then simply drop out the bottom, giving you access to the worm gear. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take the bogie frame off by gently unclipping it from the back. This bogie frame's actually broken. It was broken before I got it, and that is another common thing with these models of this era. But once the bogie frame's out, you can see there's a massive blob of white grease in there, and to my surprise, this grease is actually relatively fresh. It's not gone hard or anything. So I'm going to redistribute that through the drivetrain. Somebody's also added extra pickups to this model, so this is actually picking up from all 6 wheels on each bogie. Now Bachmann wheels on the diesels, they are in bearings, but they just unclip from the plastic bogie piece. I'm going to use a cotton bud and mess to clean the wheel treads and wheel backs to remove any old oil lubrication to make sure everything is nice and clean. But it's then I notice a problem with this wheel set while I'm cleaning it, and it's not something I've ever come across with a Bachmann diesel before, and that is that the drive gear on the axle was actually split. There is a split in the axle there in the gear, allowing it to turn freely on the axle. So now I'm going to have to examine all the other axles to make sure this isn't a problem throughout this model, and I'm going to have to source a spare Deltic wheel. Now I'm pretty sure I've got some in my stores. So while I wait to get a wheel, I'm going to clean all the pickups, again using a cotton bud and meths, and then using my tweezer nose pliers I'm just going to adjust the pickups ever so slightly, because the homemade ones on the model were causing quite a lot of drag on the wheels. So once all the wheels are clean, I put the wheels back in this bogie frame, and I keep adjusting those homemade pickups until they're rubbing on the wheel backs and that floating axle at the rear there is turning freely but also making contact. To keep everything together, I put the bogie frame back on without the middle axle, because as I said, I've got a set somewhere, I've just got to find them. The other axle on this bogie hadn't split, the other gear hadn't split, so I'm hoping it is just the one. And I'm still adjusting the pickups here. These were quite difficult to get right. I'm not sure why they put additional pickups on. In my experience, 8-wheel pickup on these models is plentiful because the wheelbase is so long. Now this is the other bogie that I've took apart, and I'm pleased to see that there are no cracks in the gears on this bogie. So it is just that one axle where the gear has cracked. And as I said, I've never come across this with a Bachmann diesel before, ever. So I'll keep an eye on my others, but it is a first for me. And once the bogies have been cleaned, wheels have cleaned, they've been re-lubricated, it's time to refit them. And that is the exact opposite of how we took them out. The wires have to thread up through the die-cast metal. There are cast holes for the pickup wires to thread through. Line up the drive shaft with the yoke in the flywheel of the motor. Make sure it's engaged correctly. And then, I'm having right trouble with this wires. And then line up the retaining screw hole on the top and then replace that large screw that we removed earlier. The most difficult bit about putting the bogies back together is lining up the drive shaft with the yoke in the flywheel, because if you can, sometimes it can feel like you've got it located correctly, but then when you put power to it, the motor spins but the drive shaft doesn't. So I'm just lining everything up there. These pickup wires will be reattached shortly. As I said earlier, I removed the screw from the PCB for ease, because when it was screwed down you couldn't really access the wires. And the wires are held in place with these plastic retainers. Now, looking back at this, while I was doing the voiceover, I'm not entirely sure why I didn't solder these wires on. That would have been a much better and much more secure connection than these plastic retaining pieces, but I might revisit that later on if I get a spare 10 minutes. So once the wires are all where they should be, those plastic bits are pushed home and the screw is replaced to hold the PCB back in place on this end. Very lucky that they are magnetic, so it's relatively easy to line them up with the hole with the screwdriver. Then I forgot to put the retaining screw in there. Look, you see now, that's not good because that could have pulled the drive shaft out, but I'll put it back in and then I'll give it a battery test on the wheels, and the wheels are spinning, so the pickups are working and the drive shaft is engaged correctly. And both bogies were overhauled in exactly the same manner. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the body shell, and the body shell sides have been damaged with this super glue. There is a lot of it on the side here. I can scrape it off with a scalpel. So what I've decided to do, and as well as that horrible black paint all over the roof and bonnet tops, I'm going to repaint this model. Now, Bachmann printed details on these Deltics, namely the exhauster hatch cover and the lifting jack points are all printed detail. So as you saw there, I bought the relevant parts from Extreme Etchings at Shawplan, and I'm going to strip the body shell down, fit those etched parts, and then give it a repaint. Now, to strip it down, you have to remove the roof fans. They're held in place with 2 screws. They're easy enough to remove. And then the glazing should be just a push fit. Now, somebody had tried to glue some of this glazing in, so it did break, but luckily it was broken on the inside, not on the actual glazing pieces. And all of the glazing came out with relatively light finger and thumb pressure. So I can just press the windows there and they pop out from the inside. Once all the glazing's been removed, I use a scalpel blade to remove this nameplate, which is actually bent in the middle. That was done by the previous owner, but they'll go into my spares because I'm not actually doing this as 9011. This Deltic will be finished as 9005, and that's because I had the nameplates spare from an Acura scale Deltic. As I said earlier, these transfers are not secure in any way. They've not been put on properly by the previous owner. They are just laying on the factory finish. They're not sealed in, and as a result they just simply scrape off and rub off. That's not very good at all, really. Now, to fit the Extreme Etchings parts, what I did was where they needed to go, I lightly scored with a scalpel to key the plastic surface. And using a Loctite Perfect pen, a very small amount of super glue was applied, and then the Extreme Etching parts, these are the lifting jack covers, were put onto the body side onto the super glue, and before the super glue dried they were manipulated in place using the printed Bachmann lines as a guide. And I do find that Loctite super glue is thin enough so that they don't protrude out the body shell too much. And as you'll see later when we've repainted it, you will hardly notice they are there. But if they weren't there, you'd notice. So it's well worth doing. And these Extreme Etchings parts really are good. So I'm just forming that part there to the tumble home of the Deltic body side. And I'll do the same with the other 7 lifting jack ports. And the exhauster hatch, which goes on the nose side. Now, I had to consult several of my Deltic books for this because there are 2 hand holes in that exhauster hatch. But it doesn't tell you on any instructions whether they face up onto the top or whether they're at the bottom. So going through a couple of my all-colour books from Strathwood on the Deltics, it took a while, but most of the pictures that were broadside were the wrong side of the Deltic until I did find one in this book here of a Deltic sat in a platform, and you can see there that the hand holes go towards the bottom. So that's how I will affix the etched part to the Deltic, which I've now done. So I've fitted all those lifting port covers and the exhauster hatch. And one last thing to do before I mask the nose ends is to rub the body side down with 1200 grit wet and dry to remove any lumps and bumps and glue marks from the previous owner, especially around the nameplate area. So this 1200 grit wet and dry was used to smooth the body sides and where all the transfers were. I do find it therapeutic rubbing the sides of models down, especially when it gets rid of all the old glue marks, and you can see that progress, you can visibly see progress being made at this point. So here we are. As I said, I've masked up the Bachmann yellow because I really do like that deep yellow colour it is. I've given the body shell a wash, the etchings are all on, the glue's dry, and the body shells have been rubbed down. So now it will be time for a coat of Halford's Grey Primer. I really don't like that all black roof. I don't know what the previous owner was thinking. I've never seen a picture of a Deltic. Yeah, they got weathered, but not all black like that. And here it is in grey primer. Now, there is still a mark on the body side where the nameplate was, but Deltic 5 had a large nameplate, and that will be covered when the model's finished, as you will see shortly. So while the primer was curing, I've managed to find another replacement Deltic wheel in my spares from a Deltic that I had stripped many years ago. So I clipped that in place, add a bit of lubrication as it's been well over a decade since this wheel was last used. So add a bit of Labelle and a little bit of oil on the bearings. And then the bogie frame is put back in place. And the bogie was reattached, as I told you earlier, with the wires threading up through and locating the drive shaft, etc. So I'm just turning the wheels there by hand with the drive shaft to make sure the lubrication spreads through the drivetrain. On one of the bogies there was a footstep missing, so I bought a Deltic detailing pack from a Bachmann Deltic off eBay, which includes pipework and bogie footsteps luckily. So with a 1mm drill bit, I'm just opening up the existing holes, and then I will fit a new footstep and secure this in place with a very small amount of Loctite super glue. And then I'm going to give the chassis a quick battery test now. It's been fully overhauled and serviced, fresh lubrication, and it's running nice and smoothly, just as these Bachmann diesels from this era do. So now that's done, it's over to the paint shop where the Deltic body shell, the primer, has had 2 days now, 48 hours to dry. And it's on my homemade airbrush table. Now what I'm doing here is I'm pouring some rail match acrylic rail blue into the tub, into the glass jar. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a small amount of waterborne rail match thinners. And the way I was taught to do this was you want to mix this up until it is the consistency of milk, green top milk. So I stir the thinners in. You can always add more thinners, so it's better to add a little bit at a time because you can't take it away. But this time I seem to have got it right first time. That is dripping off there very nicely. So I load it up into the airbrush and we start with the first of a few light coats. Now, this is how I airbrush. I've always done it this way. I know some people go up and down, but I tend to go side to side. And I've only got a relatively cheap airbrush setup that I've had off eBay for many years. Comes with a compressor and a couple of airbrushes. There's nothing fancy, and I've always had brilliant results from it. So I do the side, then I'd go along the roof in one direction, then do the other side, and then do the roof again. So that all the handrail holes, all the window ledges, windowsills, etc. have a good coat. And then I empty and clean the airbrush and give it several more light coats over the next 2 to 3 hours, cleaning the airbrush each time between each coat, otherwise the paint will set and ruin your equipment. And I mean, this may look a bit heavy, but it's just the camera and the light work. They are only light coats. This rail match acrylic blue goes on lovely, and it gives a real nice British rail blue colour. I really do like this paintwork. And it looks better already now that that horrid black roof and bonnet tops have gone. I'm just hoping at this point that the masking's up to standard and none of the blue is seeping through onto that lovely Bachmann deep yellow that they use. So that was the first coat, and that was left for an hour before giving it a couple more. And this is the next day after the last of the blue coats has gone on. And I hope you'll agree that that is a lovely even finish and a nice deep blue colour. So again, this is the second day, and then that was left again for 24 hours. And 24 hours later, I'm back out in the garage and I'm going to demask one of the noses. Now, I apologise here, but I do this a little bit off camera. The camera's facing up a bit too high, but I hope you can see there that the nice clean line that comes from this masking. This is Tamiya masking tape in conjunction with some Humbrol Mascol. And it's given a nice clean yellow and blue line edge there. And I'm pleased I've managed to keep that lovely yellow end that Bachmann made, painted in their factory. So I'm just gently peeling the masking tape away. And yeah, I'm pleased with that. Some crisp lines, not even the primer has seeped under that. So yeah, that looks really, really good. Really happy with that paint job. That looks spot on, and the blue looks absolutely gorgeous under this light. So yeah, I hope you'll agree that will look nice. Now there's a couple of stills of it. I left it again for a couple of days to fully harden. Was sat on the chassis on the layout. And then I did some detail painting. Just the kick plates and handrails were picked out in silver, along with a black wash, very thin black wash into the grills. Now the footage of me gloss varnish and putting the transfers on I actually lost, unfortunately. But basically there was a thin coat of gloss, transfers from Railtech, followed by a couple of satin coats of varnish. And here we are with it fully transferred up as 9005. And the glazing, I've started to put the glazing in now. I've shown this before, but I'll show it again. Basically, what I do is I put the glazing back in the holes in the body shell. And then using an old paintbrush and some EMA plastic weld cement, I run some EMA along the sides of the windows, and capillary action pulls the cement in around the window frames and seals all the windows in. And that is how I fixed all the windows back in the Deltic. Once that had set, the fans were put back in using the screws that we removed earlier on. These were replaced. Now I was going to paint these, but I didn't bother in the end, because eventually what I want to do is get a sound chip for this Deltic. And then another thing to do was to modify a couple of Bachmann buffer heads and glue them into the buffer shanks that are part of the body shell. You can't really replace the sprung buffers on these. It's not an easy thing to do. And having sprung buffers isn't something that overly bothers me. So using a small amount of Loctite super glue, I just glue the modified buffer heads in at the correct, the correct distance out. And the next thing to do is to sort out the head codes. Now, using Railtech transfers, I had first painted over the head codes that were already there, and I'm now fitting new ones. And what I'm doing here is I'm making sure that some of the numerals aren't level, because most of the Deltic pictures you see, the head codes are rattled round slightly. And I like the look of that. I don't like the uniform thing, because in real life they weren't all uniform. So on this one, this is going to be 1 Sierra 17, 1S17. And the one at the top there you can see I'm going to do as 1 Alpha 16 or 1A16. And according to my research, these were the up and down head codes for the Flying Scotsman in the 1970s, which is when this Deltic is based. It's got its 9000 number, no D prefix, but a top stator panel, as per some reference photos I found in some books. So as I said, these are Railtech transfers, very easy to use. The Railtech transfers are phenomenal, they really are good. And once they were put on the head code panels, they were left to dry and then given a coat of satin varnish just to seal them in. And there it is, test fit into the nose end of the Deltic. And as I said, I really like the fact that they're all a little bit higgledy-piggledy, just as they were in real life. So once the satin varnish is dry, you can see there the other head code I've done. As I said, 1 Alpha 16. That's not as higgledy-piggledy as the 1 Sierra one. But once they're both dry and the satin varnish has dried, the clear lenses are put over the top of them, both of which luckily have survived with this model. They've both been pushed inside the body shell. And then these are pushed into the aperture in the nose end. And again, using some EMA plastic weld cement, I secure these in place. I've got no intention of ever changing these, so to keep them secure, I'm gluing them in place. And then the body shell is put back onto the chassis once both head codes were put in. The body shell will only go on one way. Make sure it's the correct way, which that isn't, so I'll turn it round, and then the body shell just slips on really nicely. And then the body shell was resecured with the screws, and the nameplates on the side of the model were fixed with a small amount of satin varnish, and that was left to dry overnight. And as you can see here, I'm just testing the Deltic with a battery, and it's running lovely. Now, these models are getting long in the tooth a bit now. They have been out quite some time, but they do look all right for budget models now. I mean, it hasn't got the finesse of an Acura scale Deltic, but in my opinion, this looks the part. And it really does actually look quite a nice model now that all that horrible weathering has been removed. If you've got an engine that needs repair or attention, and you'd like to send it in to me, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com. And who knows, it may even feature in an episode of Trash to Track in the future. So I'll leave you now with a video of this Deltic running around the garden on a rake of blue and grey Mark 1s. I hope you'll agree it really does look the part. Thank you so much for watching Trash to Track. Again, please like, share, comment and subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Bye for now.